Section 12.2 is on graphing quadratic functions. So we're going to talk about quadratic functions. Pretty cool name, sounds exciting. Probably something you should get in your notes, put that vocabulary word in there. And just so that you know, a quadratic function is one in which the greatest power of the variable is 2. What the heck are they talking about? Function in which the greatest power of the variable is 2. Well, it's going to be something like this. Take a look at this. We've got y equals x squared. So we've got some kind of variable where we've got an x squared term. That's what they're talking about when we're talking about a quadratic. And what they mean is the greatest power of is 2 would mean it is not y equals ax cubed. Okay, that would be not a quadratic equation. So let's take a look at this first. We're going to see if we can figure out how we would graph this thing and what you need to do. The easiest way, I believe, is to simply start off and make a t-table. And you know, here's my graph. I'm going to try to graph y equals x squared. And I'm just going to put in different values for x and y. So if I put in a value of 1, actually let's start out even easier. Let's start out with 0. If I put in 0, 0 squared, hey, oh, that's easy, that's 0. So that's 0. And then I put in 1. And if I go 1, 1 times 1 is 1. All right. And then let's try negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 1. Well, negative times a negative makes a positive, so it gives me positive 1. And let's just do a couple more. Let's say I do 2, and 2 times 2 is 4, so 2 and 4. And then if I do negative 2, it's going to give me positive 4 also. Okay? So because negative 2 times negative 2, positive, negative times negative makes positive, positive 4. So now I can come back and I can graph that, and I can graph each of these points. So I can graph 0, 0. I can graph 1, 1. Negative 1, so I'm going to the left, and the left is negative. Negative 1, 1. 2, 1, 2, 2, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And negative 2, 4. And if I continued, I'm going to get this graph, and it's going to look like that. And then, now what you're going to do is you're going to plot like 4 or 5 points. And then you need to graph what they call a smooth curve. So you want to make a curve that connects all these, makes a nice graph, and it continues. Make sure you put your arrows, because it does continue on past all that. Okay? All right, let's try another one. Here we have y equals negative 2x squared. And let's get rid of the other and start with another color here. Y equals negative 2x squared. So let's do my t-table again. Y equals negative 2x squared, and x and y. And usually 0 is always just a good easy one to put in there. So 0 and 0. Okay. 1 is also another usually good one. So 1 squared is 1 times negative 2. That's negative 2. So, you know, so if I go to negative 2 times 1 squared is 1 times negative 2, negative 2. Okay. And if I do the same thing with negative 1, you know, anytime that I square a value, I'm going to get a positive, because you're going to take a negative times a negative. So I always like to do the opposite of the ones that I just did. So I just did 1. I'm going to do negative 1, and it's going to give me the same value. Negative 1 is going to also give me negative 2. And if I put in 2, 2 squared is 4. So negative 2 times 4 is going to be negative 8. And if I put in negative 2, it's going to give me negative 8. So now I can go and graph these. And notice how, you know, on the first one, all my y values were positive values. And here, other than 0. And here, all my y values are negative. So this one graph is going down. It's going the opposite direction. So when you see this negative sign here, that can tell you in your head, this should tell you right here, that the graph is going to look like this. It's going to point down. Or it's going to be open down, however you want to say that, I guess. It's going to be open going down. Everything would fall out of it. If this value here is positive, the graph is going to open going up. All right, so let's plot. We've got 0, 0, That one's right there. We've got 1, -2. They didn't quite get it on the line there. And they've got -1, -2. And then we've got 2, -8. Oh, wait a minute. They tricked me here. And they did not go by the same values I thought they were going by. 0, 0 we got. Okay, and then we go -1, that's here, 2. Alright, so that's right there. My board's not quite on. And then 1, 0. And then 2 is here. This is good. This is 2. 2, -8 right here, and -2, 8. And my board is not completely calibrated here, so I get kind of a goofy area down here. Okay, so it's going to look like that as we graph that. All right, let's try. I don't want you. No, don't go away. Now let's do another one. Make it just a little bit harder. We've got y equals x squared plus 2. So let's take a look at how we would do that. But once again, the easiest thing, just make the t-tables. That's how I always find these easiest to do. So plug in your easy numbers, 0. Now this one's not going to come out to be 0, because if I put in 0, 0 plus 2 is 2. Alright, so now let's try 1. And 1 squared is 1 plus 2. 1 plus 2 is 3. Now -1. Now this one, when we have a value here, this is going to change things just a little bit. It's not quite as simple. So let's put in -1. So if I get -1 and I square that, that's 1 plus 2, 3. So same thing, okay? Now let's go 2, and if I go 2 squared is 4 plus 2 is 6, and if I go -2, -2 squared is -2 times -2 is positive 4 plus 2 is 6. Okay, great. So there's my point. So now I come over and I plot it. And notice that in the past I always had 0, 0, right? But I don't have it this time because I've got this plus 2 right here. So that kind of changes how this works. So it's 0, 2. So really all it did was shift everything up 2 spaces. Okay, and then I've got 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, -1, 3, right there. Then I've got 2, 6, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can't count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and -2, 6. And then just make your curve nice and beautiful. Little arrows there. Oh, such a gorgeous looking curve. And there you have it. Okay? So this is if we have this kind of a function. Y equals a being, the number in front of the x, ax squared plus a number. All right, let's try this one. Now look, right away, you see, oh look, I've got a negative in front of my x. That should tell you right away my graph is going to look like that. It should go down. It should open to the bottom. Okay? So you always know that when you do this. All right, let's work this next problem. All right, I got to put that down a second so I can move this down a little bit. All right, so once again, t-table. Easiest thing, plot in the points. They do a kind of a more advanced one. I just like to put in the points. 0. All right, so if I put in 0 here, 0 plus 4, 4. Now try 1. 1 squared is 1, but oh, there's a negative. Now, that negative comes in after I do the squaring. So notice this, okay, so kind of ignore this at first. Do the squaring. So take 1 times 1, well, that's 1. And now I've got to do this negative. All of a sudden that comes back in. And so I get times -1 equals -1. Okay? That's a lot of work to get that answer there. -1 plus 4 is positive 3. So now you understand why I make a big deal about being able to add and subtract negative numbers, because once again, we have to do that. We've got to add and subtract in negatives in order to do all this. All right, if I put in negative 1, I get the same thing. Negative 1 squared is 1 times the negative is negative 1 plus 4 is 3. So negative 1, 3. Now let's try another one, 2. So 2 squared, 2 times 2, then take the negative of that. Okay, that was kind of weird. My program that records all this stuff just kind of decided to quit working. So, we were up to all this other stuff, and our last one we were going to put in was negative 2, and negative 2 squared plus, or negative 2 squared times the negative 1, negative of negative 2 squared. I'm getting confused here. Equals negative 4 plus 4 equals 0. So I get 0, 2 was 0, 1 was 3, negative 1 was 3, and then 0 was 4. Okay, so now I can go and plot my points. So I've got 0, 4. That's this point right here. I've got negative 1, positive 3, 1, 2, 3, positive 1, positive 3, 2, and 0, and negative 2, and 0. And usually, I always like to try to get about 5 points. It was usually enough to kind of get the idea of how much that curve is. Make sure you put your arrows in when you do that. All right, take a minute now and stop the video and do those 3 problems. Graph them. Okay, so put those on the graph and show me what they look like. All right, so hopefully you got this all figured out. First one, x, y, 0, 1, 1, 2, negative 1, 2, 2, 5, and negative 2, 5 would be our graph. So if I were to graph that, I would get 0, 1. Now remember, positive number, graph's going to look like this. Make sure you think that way. 1, 2, 1, 2, negative 1, 2, and 2, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and negative 2, 5. So this graph is going to look like this. Okay, so it should look like that. If I do the next one, all right, let's get rid of that. And I once again plug in my numbers. I've got x and y. 0, negative 1. 1 gives me 1 squared is 1 times negative 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 minus 1, negative 3. And negative 1 would be negative 3. And then 2 squared is 4. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. Minus 1, negative 9. And then negative 2, negative 9. All right, so if I plot these now, once again, you should be able to tell me which way the graph's going to look. Okay, 0, negative 1, 0, negative 1. So it's going to start down below the line. Then I've got 1, negative 3, 1, 2, 3, and negative 1, negative 3. And then 2, negative 9, and that would be somewhere down here. And then negative 2, negative 9 would be somewhere down there. So I'm going to get a graph that looks like this. So it should look something similar to that when you get all done. And the third one is a nice, easy one. And once again, x, y, 0, 0, 1, negative 1, negative 1, negative 1, 2, negative 4, negative 2, negative 4. It's negative, so it's going to go down. 0, 0, 1, negative 1, negative 1, negative 1, 2, negative 1, 2, 3, 4, and negative 2, negative 4, and here's my graph. Okay?